Hello and welcome to the last in the series of webinars examining aspects of differentiated language for English language learners through the WIDA English Language Development Standards. We are going to take another brief look at can-do descriptors and follow that up by looking through a classroom activity looking at model performance indicators for ELLs. Well, as we've normally been doing throughout, let's take a look at both the objectives and a consideration. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to apply the can-do descriptors for ELLs. Sorry for the typo there. It's for ELLs, and we're going to learn how the model performance indicators, or the MPIs, serve as exemplars of ELL performance in content language. And so for consideration, I'd like you to note that English language learners come to our classrooms differentiated by culture, language, experience, readiness, and mode of learning. I think that's been the overwhelming underlying message throughout this webinar series. It makes sense that we should differentiate our instruction in response to them. With that in mind, then, we're going to revisit our can-do descriptors, and I would ask you to take a look at your version of it. This slide does not reveal the details around can-do descriptors, but I want to just to highlight the notion that's involved here. That there are two dynamics involved with regard to using can-do descriptors. Remember that the performance definitions that are the parameters for the English proficiency levels suggest that our students are able or can do certain things with the language. The dynamic that we're referring to here is one of two possible pathways. One is to embed what students are able to do as a starting point of instruction, and the other is to aim for the next level of instruction. So what you see here for Jose Carlos, who is at the cluster 6-8, and with regard to listening is at level 4, he's at the expanding level. And since he is at that level, once we're assured that he can perform in listening through the pathways suggested by the can-do descriptors, then what we need to do in terms of delivering instruction is have him engage in level 5 or bridging related activities. Similarly, if Jose Carlos demonstrates 5-level proficiency in speaking, the aim after establishing that he is comfortable and operating at the can-do level in level 5 is to aim for grade level parity with his mainstream peers, because that is the level through which he should engage in learning. Oftentimes that will include not having supports, but it all depends upon the nature of the content that's being used as the focus of instruction. Similarly, with reading and writing, Jose Carlos is at a 4, and what we want to aim for is a level 5 instruction once it's established that he's in level 4. And with regard to writing, since he's at level 3, once we've given him some practice in level 3, then we want him to engage in level 4 kinds of activities as suggested by the can-do descriptors. Now notice that these circles are placed a little bit differently in each of the columns that they're located. For reading, for example, it's suggested that Jose Carlos is at level 4 expanding, but way at the edge and bordering into level 5 bridging. So that means that his transition into level 5 will be quicker than his transition in writing at level 3, in developing, going into expanding. You can see that he's firmly established there in probably the middle area, slightly above with regard to his proficiency in level 3. This suggests the fact that the access test, instead of just giving general levels of proficiency, will give a point value. So for example, level 3, 3.0, 3.1, 3.2, 3.3, 3.4, 3.5, 3.6, on to 3.9 and 4.0. That is the number value that is accorded across all of the language domains, and wherever the student is placed. If the student is placed at the early part, in the early part of the proficiency value, like 3.1, 3.2, 3.3, then that means that that student should engage in that level, that is 3 level, can do activities before aiming for the next level higher, or 4.0 expanding level activities. So this is the dynamic in terms of using can-do descriptors. And just to go back here for listening and speaking, you can see that in listening, Jose Carlos is at the beginning of the expanding level of listening, and he needs to remain in this area for a while before going on to engage in activities at the 5 level. And similarly at the 6 level, or rather 5 level for speaking, Jose Carlos is way at the end, and it suggests that fairly quickly he'll be able to engage in the kinds of activities that his mainstream peers are engaged in. So again, to repeat, that is the dynamic that is involved with regard to using can-do descriptors. All will be revealed when you see the access test scores and see the point values that are accorded to them. The teacher report, as we have discussed in an earlier webinar, will provide that kind of information, and will result in a lot of very rich conversation around what is connoted for what ELLs can do in the various content lessons. Another dimension to the use of can-dos and the use of instruction in general really is kind of suggested by a protocol that might be familiar to many of you out there. It's what it boils down to is just plain good, solid teaching, and that's epitomized in the gradual release model. It is a model that involves the teacher's responsibility initially in terms of a focus lesson, in modeling the kind of language and what needs to be learned, and it then is followed by guided instruction in which the teacher guides students in working around the concepts and the language in those concepts in the instruction. And then the next step is a collaborative learning step or stage in which students have the opportunity to work together to practice what is being taught. And then finally, the independent level is when students get an opportunity to work on their own to demonstrate their own independence. Well, applied to language, this is extremely important. It's embodied in these expressions that you see on the slide. I do it, which means the teacher is demonstrating through the use of language. We do it. Teacher and students are practicing together with teacher guidance. You do it together, that is, the teacher observes the collaborative activity or activities that take place around the language use, and then finally the independent use of the language around the concepts. You do it alone. It goes from teacher responsibility to student responsibility. This 4-stage practice process is an important one and an ideal one to strive for in the delivery of instruction. But of course, in the real world of things, there's often precious little time to engage in all four stages of instruction. But wherever possible for our English language learner, it is very important for them to engage in language practice that can involve as many of these steps as possible. So let's take a look now at an example of how this can all be applied, and put it all together in the form of a science experiment performed in class. We'll take a look at the different levels at which students can use language across the different levels of gradual release, and we'll take a look at what if there was a class of English language learners at a whole variety of levels, what they would be expected to do, how they would be expected to perform. So the experiment is this. Mr. Bloom, in a science class, is teaching a chemistry unit on physical and chemical changes. He demonstrates how mixing some chemicals changes the color and temperature of solutions, and how heating water changes its state of matter. After giving the students the definitions of physical and chemical changes, the students perform their own experiments in small groups. So what a student or students are expected to do might be involved in Mr. Bloom's assignment. Students are to write a lab report describing their observations and concluding from them this type of reaction in each case. So what we have in effect is the expectation that all students are going to be engaged in writing, including English language learners at different levels of proficiency. So with regard to the gradual release focus, the teacher models the lesson, I do it, teacher models the experiment, and in the process of modeling the experiment uses the language in describing the steps of the experiment. Going way back to one of our original initial webinars, the process here is a think aloud process, and talking about the language, talking about the step or the steps involved in the experiment. Then, in the second stage of delivering instruction, we have the guided stage. We do it. The teacher and the students perform the experiment together, and the students follow the teacher in doing so. The teacher asks the students, with regard to language, to describe the steps of the experiment as they are performing it. The third step, you do it together, meaning the students do it collectively in groups. They perform the experiment, and the students ask and answer questions. These questions, of course, can be provided by the teacher, or it could be created by the students, but in groups they would question each other about the experiment as a group activity while they're performing it. So they're doing something tactile kinesthetic and using language around the performance of that activity. And then the independent stage, you do it alone, is when the students write a lab report describing the experiment and the results of that experiment. So the students are engaged in writing at a level in which they are proficient. Now here's where the differentiation of language comes into place, because students are going to be at different levels of proficiency with regard to writing, and the expectations, what is equitable for them and challenging for them to engage in, is going to vary according to their level. So with regard to the writing domain, the can-dos indicate that, and this is for the 9-12 level, that level 1s can produce short answer responses. Now this is kind of generic. Level 2s can make lists of words, phrases, and expressions. This is what they're able to do at level 2. Level 3, complete reports from templates. Level 4, summarize notes from notes or text. And level 5, create original pieces. So keeping these can-do descriptors in mind, then the teacher is going to require of ELLs varying degrees of writing to demonstrate either their performance, their solid performance at a level at which they have been assessed, or is going to challenge them to engage in an activity that will require writing at the next level. If you remember Jose Carlos and the expectation to eventually engage him in activities at a next level higher, the same dynamic occurs here. So what we have in effect for a lab report assignment would be differentiated responsibilities according to the writing levels of the students. The level 1 students would be expected to produce short answer responses as their lab report assignment. The level 2 students would make lists of words or phrases and expressions that would be central to the lab report, and it could be in a kind of a stage sequence, step 1, step 2, step 3, and having specific words and phrases. Could even be short sentences that would describe the experiment. Level 3s would complete a report, a lab report, but the lab report would be in the form perhaps of a template in which the student would have to fill in specific words or fill in language to complete the report. Level 4s, their expectation might be to summarize their notes from the experiment and to write up according to a template or an outline their lab report assignment. And level 5s might be expected, perhaps with a partner, with support, to create their own lab report without any template or outline at all. So the dynamic here, then, you can see across the proficiency levels for writing, the expectation after having been engaged in a number of activities, or rather a number of stages of engaging in the experiment, from the teacher modeling to teacher guiding students to students working with each other to students working independently. The lab report then could be done for students at different levels. So the nature of the dynamic that's involved. Now, again, to repeat, what appears to be a little bit onerous at the beginning, I can assure you becomes effective and efficient through practice. And in coming up with a lab report assignment, the differentiation which connects the teacher to the performance definitions around what a student knows leads to the differentiated language expectation in an activity like a language report. And that is the nature of the dynamic. So differentiated, to be a little bit more specific with regard to the lab report, the level 1s might answer WH questions based on the experiment. Level 2s might answer questions on the lab report based on the experiment. So the teacher would create some questions based on the laboratory experiment. Level 3s would complete the lab report following step-by-step procedures. Level 4s could produce a lab report from an outline, and level 5s could, with a partner or individually, create their own lab report based on having experienced the steps of the experiment. So that is the dynamic, in effect, that is involved, that bring together the interplay of the performance definitions, an understanding of the performance criteria that involves linguistic complexity, language forms and conventions, and vocabulary, and the can-do descriptors, along with the model performance indicators that are from the resource guide. Now, the resource guide is located here, as you can see, and you probably have one right beside you. And I'm going to show you how then what the students did, how that is articulated through model performance indicators. So we have, for example, if you look at page 64 in your resource guide, and I'm just going to verify that to make sure that it's there. It's page 64. You'll see at the bottom of the page under writing it says example topic, chemical and physical change. So an example performance indicator is answer WH questions based on experiments involving chemical or physical change using drawings, words, and phrases in the first language or the second language. Keep in mind that at that level, if you are working with a student who knew no English whatsoever, it is appropriate for that student to demonstrate knowledge and understanding in the first language. Of course, what we want to do is to transfer that knowledge production in English before too long. So we have that. For level 2, if you look at the writing model performance indicator, answer questions on lab reports based involving chemical or physical change using phrases and sentences in the first language or the second language. Level 3, completing lab reports following step-by-step procedures based on experiments involving chemical or physical change using a series of sentences. Level 4, producing lab reports from outlines or learning logs based on experiments involving chemical or physical change in paragraph form. And level 5, creating lab reports based on science experiments involving chemical or physical change. Notice that it is not, what's not indicated here is a support because it is at a level 5. So there are some options here for level 5 students. So the dynamic then involves these tools that we've been using throughout the webinars, and I hope that you will be able to engage in some rich discussion among yourselves and with the instructor with regard to the application of these different tools in your own teaching context. I just want to conclude by showing you that a model performance indicator, which is exemplified throughout the second half of the 2007 resource guide, all contains a language function or communication process, a topic, and a support. And it is an exemplar. It is meant to demonstrate what a student is able to do as kind of a language target, a goal to perform in the language, in a particular language domain, with the kind of support that is important for a student at a particular level. So I'd like you to reconsider this notion that we started out with here, and that is that English language learners come to our classrooms differentiated by culture, language, experience, readiness, and mode of learning. It makes sense that we should differentiate our instruction in response to them. And please remember that our students, even though they may be at similar levels of proficiency, come from different backgrounds, one from the other, especially with regard to language. Their profile will certainly be different in terms of their individual language domains, and they will be expected to, and you can engage them in different kinds of supports so that they can practice their content language in a strategic manner, and continue learning towards academic achievement while increasing their academic language proficiency so that they're neither underwhelmed or overwhelmed with regard to language. So with that, I will conclude and hope that you will be able to apply some of these notions that we've been discussing through this range of seminars and through your class discussions, as well as other readings that you've engaged in. Thank you very much.